At a remote airfield, a mysterious woman named Camille Hart arrives with expired clearance and a bag full of secrets. Young guards confront her, but when they uncover a faded patch, an emblem of the erased Falcon Unit, everything changes. Colonel Grant, haunted by memories of a lost mission, instantly recognizes her. Camille isn't just a contractor, she's a ghost from the past, carrying knowledge vital to stopping a new invisible threat. As Sabotage targets military drone systems, the truth emerges, the techniques mirror her own. Camille agrees to help, not for recognition, but to prevent another unit from vanishing into silence. If this story resonated with you, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us share powerful stories like Camille's, tales of courage, sacrifice, and unseen heroes. Drop a comment below to honor the quiet protectors in your life. Let's make sure their stories are never forgotten. The command came sharp and quick. Rip it all open. Dump everything out. Now. The young guard's voice cracked with urgency as he fumbled with zippers, tugging through weathered fabric like he feared what he might find. His partner flipped the olive drab pack onto the inspection table, contents spilling out with a clatter. Camille Hart didn't move. She stood there, calm, motionless, like she'd seen this kind of chaos before and had long since stopped reacting to it. Metal tools rang across the metal surface. A worn field map, an old folded patch, a faded hawk silhouette dissolving into mist. That was the moment they froze. Fingers stopped mid-search, brows furrowed, silence thickened. Then Colonel Grant stepped in. He had seen something the others didn't. His face drained of color, voice dropped to a whisper, strained and reverent. "Stand down," he ordered. "Don't touch anything else." His eyes were locked on the patch. "That's Falcon Unit." The weight of that sentence shifted the room. Suddenly, the invisible woman was impossible to ignore. Who was Camille Hart, and why did a forgotten patch make a seasoned colonel lose all composure? Outside, the noonday sun poured across Northwind Airfield in a clean, harsh glare. But inside that cinder block checkpoint, the temperature had dipped. Suspicion and confusion filled the cold, recycled air. The base had welcomed all manner of contractors and inspectors over the years. None had left a mark like this one. Camille had arrived alone. No entourage, no fanfare. She walked with quiet intent, a kind of stillness that didn't draw attention so much as avoid it. She wore no badge of rank or symbol of power, just a weathered olive jacket, sleeves soft and frayed, the way old flags wear down after years in the wind. Her boots were worn, dusty, soles tired from long walks. On her shoulder hung a single pack, military issued, long ago, perhaps kept out of loyalty or something else entirely. She approached the gate and presented a laminated contractor's pass, edges dull and scuffed from time. Private Jensen squinted at the expiration date. "Ma'am, I'll need to verify this," he said, trying to keep a professional tone, but already sensing something about this wouldn't go by the book. He tapped the glass to signal his partner. Sergeant Hail stepped in, hand resting casually on his belt. Camille didn't argue. She didn't flinch. She didn't even speak. Just nodded slightly and waited, as if she'd done this 100 times before. Hail inspected the pass. "Clearance expired. We'll need to do a full inspection of your belongings, ma'am." There was no aggression in his voice, just the edge of protocol. Northwind couldn't afford mistakes, not when so many classified drone systems and comms gear were housed within its fences. Camille didn't push back. She slid the bag off her shoulder, placed it neatly on the inspection table. Still no words, no protest. Her patience wasn't passive, it was unsettling. Hale opened the main zipper. Inside, tools. Not standard issue, not off the shelf. A compact soldering iron, precision optical calibrator, wire pliers polished by use. Everything had the feel of experience. Then came a folded terrain map, its creases worn soft. A battered field notebook followed, its pages dense with meticulous, handwritten notations. Jensen's frown deepened. "Where'd you get this gear?" His voice sharpened. This wasn't normal. Civilians didn't walk around with tools like these, not without approval. Hale dug further, brushing against a second seam. He probed it, found something behind the lining, tore the fabric, a hidden compartment. Inside, a single patch, the embroidered image of a hawk dissolving into mist. Its edges were faded, threads worn but unmistakable to someone who knew. The young guards didn't know. "What's this supposed to be?" Hale asked, holding it aloft like contraband. Camille said nothing. She didn't blink. Her body remained still, like stone. Not defensive, just steady. She wasn't trying to hide. She was waiting. Because this wasn't for them. Not these boys with their clean boots and fresh certainty. Camille Hart wasn't a contractor. She wasn't just a civilian with expired clearance and unauthorized gear. She was a remnant, a whisper from the past that refused to die, a living trace of something scrubbed from databases and forgotten in after-action reports, a name not meant to be spoken anymore. And that room, sterile and gray, humming with fluorescent lights, grew colder. Jensen shifted uneasily. Hale's confident stance cracked just slightly. They didn't understand it yet, but they stood at the edge of something bigger than their training manuals and ID checklists. Camille waited, because when you've lived like a ghost, you learn the truth doesn't need to be forced. It just waits for the right moment and the right eyes. The checkpoint air pressed down around them. Quiet, dense. The quiet before a storm. Private Jensen looked at Sergeant Hail. The patch in Hale's hand suddenly felt too heavy for its size. The hawk, its faded outline stitched in time and memory, meant nothing to them. Just a scrap of cloth. Just one more oddity from a woman they didn't know was history walking right through their gate. He didn't belong there, not really. But fate has a way of ensuring certain people arrive exactly when they're needed most. The sound of boots approached, neither rushed nor dragging, but paced with the deliberate rhythm of a man who carried both command and a lifetime of truths too heavy to ever truly set down. Colonel David Grant. His temples had gone gray over the years, but his gaze remained laser-sharp, his spine still straight as a rifle from decades of service. He hadn't planned to stop at the checkpoint. In fact, he had been on his way to yet another dry logistics briefing, one more meeting about drone readiness, redundancies, and supply chains. A routine day at Northwind. Until it wasn't. As always, Grant's eyes swept the checkpoint with the reflex of a soldier who had learned long ago that danger doesn't always announce itself. A habit forged on forgotten battlefields. And then, he saw it. The patch. Time folded, the air thinned. He wasn't at the checkpoint anymore. He was back years ago on a wind-scoured ridge in a place never named, where no map dared to leave a mark. Smoke stung his eyes. The heavy stench of burning fuel mingled with the metallic sting of blood. Their comms had gone dead. Enemy jammers had cut through every plea for backup. Then, like a thread pulled through chaos, a voice had emerged. Steady, clear, unshaken. Camille Hart, Falcon Unit's signal tech. The one who kept them linked, who kept them breathing when hope had turned into a cruel myth. And now, there it was, her patch, resting like some forbidden artifact on a cold steel table, pinched between the gloved fingers of a young sergeant far too new to understand what that symbol truly meant. Grant went pale. His pulse pounded in his ears. But when he spoke, his voice didn't shake. It came out low, measured, as though he were speaking to both the living and the ghosts who still lingered. "Stand down," he said, eyes locked on the patch. "Don't touch anything else. That's Falcon Unit." Sergeant Hail froze. The gravity in Grant's voice was heavier than any shouted command. His fingers opened as if burned, and the patch slipped from his grip, fluttering softly back to the table. Jensen stood silent, confused, glancing from his superior officer to the woman standing calmly before them. Falcon Unit? That wasn't in any dossier. No intel packet had ever mentioned them. But Grant's reaction said more than 1,000 classified files ever could. Something shifted in the room, the kind of shift you felt in your bones more than heard with your ears. Colonel Grant moved forward slowly, deliberately, like he was stepping into sacred ground. He didn't spare a glance for the guards. His entire focus stayed locked on her. "Camille," he said, not asking but acknowledging, affirming what his instincts had already told him was true. Camille Hart met his gaze, and for a moment the years fell away. Everything, the silence, the scars, the distance, collapsed into that one look. Grant opened his mouth to speak again. "I didn't think," he started, but the words faltered. Because how do you say it? How do you admit that you'd given up hope? That you'd believed no one made it out? That the only place you thought you'd ever see that insignia again was in your nightmares? Camille gave a slight nod. No smile, no relief, just a solemn recognition between two people who had seen the same edge of darkness and carried it ever since. Grant turned, partially addressing the guards without truly breaking away from her eyes. "Leave us." They obeyed at once. The confusion remained, but their duty was louder than their questions. The door clicked shut behind them. Now alone in the cold gray room, Grant exhaled slowly and lowered himself into the metal chair beside the inspection table. His hands that had once penned deployment orders, handed out medals, written final letters to grieving families, trembled as they hovered over the patch. He barely touched it, as if it might vanish. "All these years," he whispered. "Why now?" Camille placed her palms gently on the edge of the table. "Because your drones are being taken out. Because the pattern matches tactics I designed. And because if I didn't come forward, I wasn't sure who else could." Grant looked at her again. Not just the jacket worn thin at the seams, not just the fatigue in her eyes. He saw what the young guards couldn't. The protector who had once kept 47 soldiers alive through a night designed to kill them all. The one who chose obscurity over honor, silence over recognition, truth over safety. And now, standing here once more, she wasn't a ghost from the past. She was the key to surviving what was coming. The room felt smaller. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the silence like static. Colonel David Grant stared at Camille Hart, but his mind was already drifting. Back through the fight of memory to a time and place the world was designed to forget. Falcon Unit. There were no medals, no news reports, no mentions in the archives or plaques on some polished wall, because Falcon wasn't supposed to exist. Not officially, not even in the margins of a black ops file. They were the ones deployed when plausible deniability became priority one. Missions too risky, too political, too fragile for the public eye. Falcon was the contingency plan, the whisper behind enemy lines. And Camille Hart? She had been their center, their anchor, the signal tech who held the line when the world turned against them. The reason they made it out at all. Design in the original systems your fancy new code is built on. You wouldn't be flying without the innovation she buried in 100 classified schematics. That shut Graham up, not out of obedience, but out of a dawning respect that came with realizing he was working alongside someone whose knowledge ran deeper than any manual, someone whose legacy had been scrubbed clean from every official archive, but not from the machines she built. Camille didn't waste time proving herself. She moved like a shadow through the tangle of code, eyes flicking across lines of logic as though they were lines from a language only she spoke fluently. The others watched her with a mix of reverence and confusion. She barely spoke, but when she did, every word was an instruction, not a suggestion. There was no room for ego in this operation. She asked for silence, precision, discipline, and they gave it, not because of her title, but because of her presence. In the first 12 hours, she uncovered 2 hidden breaches, tiny gaps in the security mesh that shouldn't have existed, code sequences that bore her signature style but twisted, corrupted. Someone had taken her architecture and weaponized it. That's what hit hardest. Not the betrayal, but the intimate knowledge it required. This wasn't reverse engineering. This was personal. This was someone who had studied Falcon's every move. Someone who had learned not from textbooks, but from experience. By hour 20, they had a trace. Barely a whisper, a fragment of a signal bouncing through outdated comm nodes. Hardware Falcon once used. Camille stared at the screen for a long time, her hands still on the trackpad, unmoving. The others didn't interrupt. They sensed the moment's gravity. "It's him," she said finally. Grant stepped into the room, having been summoned the moment the trace appeared. "You're sure?" Camille nodded once. "We trained him. He was Falcon's backup systems architect, left just before the final mission. He had doubts, disagreements." Grant frowned. "We lost track of him after the collapse. You think he turned?" She didn't answer directly. "I think he survived, and I think survival changed him." There was a pause heavy with implication. Everyone in the room knew what that meant. A ghost who had learned too well how to stay hidden, who knew their strengths, their weaknesses, who knew how to exploit everything Falcon had once done to stay one step ahead. Grant stepped closer to Camille. "Can you stop him?" Camille's face was still, but her eyes burned with something colder than anger. "Yes, but not if we keep playing by the old rules." He nodded slowly, already understanding. "Then we won't." The next 24 hours moved like a blade drawn quiet and fast. The team rerouted systems, scrubbed infiltration points, baited the signal with false echoes. Camille directed every move like a conductor with no score, only instinct. She didn't sleep. She barely ate. But her mind moved like it had in the field, sharp, relentless. At hour 45, they got their first clean intercept, a pulse sent to an old network, encrypted in a way only Falcon used. She decrypted it in under 4 minutes. What she found wasn't just data, it was a signature, a call-out, a challenge. Whoever he was now, he wanted her to know it was him. He wanted her involved, and she was. At hour 47, Grant came back into the room. His uniform was wrinkled, his face lined with worry and the weight of decisions made in silence. "Your window's closing. We need to move." Camille stood, cracking her knuckles slowly. Her voice when she spoke was quiet, steady. "Then let's go finish what they tried to erase." And so the mission began. Not the kind written into medals or carved into monuments, but the kind carried in the silence between orders. The space where duty and memory collide. Camille wasn't here to reclaim honor. She wasn't here for vengeance. She was here to make sure no more ghosts were born from silence. Grant followed her out, never once questioning her plan, because he understood now. Camille hadn't been forgotten. She had been waiting. And now history wasn't just repeating, it was reckoning. She had helped design those systems long before most of them had even enlisted. That fact alone quieted Lieutenant Graham. He stopped speaking, eyes tracking Camille as she moved. She dove into her work without ceremony, hands gliding across the console with the kind of controlled precision usually reserved for operating rooms. Each keystroke was exact, deliberate, like a surgeon navigating muscle, vein, and nerve. She didn't waste time on small talk. Every word was a command, clear and sharp. "Check that frequency band, it's corrupted. Run the encryption again, not the default, the legacy cipher from World 9 protocols. There, see that? That's not a system hiccup. That's a backdoor ping." Time dissolved around her. Hours slipped by, unnoticed. Day melted into night and bled right back into morning. But Camille didn't pause. It wasn't adrenaline keeping her going. It was something deeper, steadier, a quiet, fierce responsibility. She wasn't chasing recognition. She was answering a call. And no one really talks about this, do they? The true sentinels of our infrastructure, the ones whose names you never read in reports, who aren't draped in medals or applauded on podiums. They work in silence, eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights, fingers dancing across keyboards, minds solving puzzles the rest of us don't even know exist. Camille was one of them, one of the unseen few who protect everything from behind the curtain. But she wasn't just patching the damage. She was rewriting the blueprints. She reprogrammed fallback frequencies so deep in the system that no hostile force could sniff them out. She embedded counter-signal patches, firewalls so advanced they intercepted threats before they even manifested as threats. Her scans caught the interference signature. Specific, unmistakable. It bore the mark of someone trained like her, not just skilled, educated in the same arcane systems, taught to think in the same code. Graham stood by, no longer skeptical, just silent, watching her unravel the network like it was something she had authored herself. He turned to Colonel Grant, voice hushed with reverence. "Sir, she's not fixing this. She made this. We've been using her architecture all along." Grant gave a tight nod, lips curling into a weary smile. "I know." Word spread, of course. It always does, even when no one says anything aloud. Whispers sparked across the base. "The woman at the checkpoint? She's some kind of legend. Falcon Unit, weren't they a myth? Colonel Grant vouched for her. That's all I need to hear." Camille didn't react. She wasn't here for fame or status. She was here because the mission demanded her. That was enough. The breakthrough came on the second night. Camille, hunched over a terminal, froze. Her eyes narrowed on a particular stream of data. Her voice came low and certain. There. Graham leaned closer. What is it? That's the source. That's who's been probing your drones, and I recognized the fingerprint. The entire room went still. The weight of that statement landed hard. A rogue Falcon? Grant asked, voice thick with dread. Camille hesitated, the answer forming on her lips like something sharp she didn't want to taste. I don't know. Not yet. But whoever it is, they're not done. This was a test. They'll strike again. And just like that, a woman the system had all but discarded became its shield. No request for title. No craving for thanks. All she asked for was access. Access to the tools, to the system, to do what had to be done in silence. Because true service doesn't need the spotlight. It thrives in the dark, where no one watches, for the sake of everyone who never thinks to look. On the third day, the air at Northwind Airfield was different. Dense, hushed, as if the base itself sensed the coming storm. The techs moved through their tasks, but eyes kept flicking toward the sky. The usual hum of machines, the whir of fans. It was all drowned under an unspoken tension. Camille stood in the control room off to the sink, sleeves rolled, face bathed in the glow of monitors. She said nothing. She didn't need to. She was listening, waiting. Then it began. 3 training drones, mid-routine, suddenly spiraled out of alignment. Their GPS scrambled, telemetry erratic. They wrenched through the air, skidding off course, moving with unpredictable violence. One wrong twitch and they'd crash. Into each other, into the base, into lives. Alarms screamed. Controllers barked orders, hands flying over controls. Graham's voice sliced through the chaos. We're losing them, sir. We cannot override the systems. At the far edge of the room, Grant felt it, a cold drop in his stomach. He knew what came next. But before catastrophe could strike, the Camille stepped forward. Calm, unshaken. Engage the fallback encryption, the one I loaded yesterday. Do it now. The text paused, just for a breath. Then Graham moved, trusting her without hesitation. The commands surged through the system, silent, unseen, but thunderously effective. The wild data patterns smoothed. The drones, one after another, corrected their course. Their paths became linear, predictable, safe. The room fell into that deep, echoing silence that only comes after disaster brushes by without touching you. Camille let out a slow breath, one she'd been holding far too long. This is what heroism looks like. Not spectacle, not parades, just one steady hand at the exact right moment. A calm voice when the world starts to tip, a woman who had already done the impossible and who did it again, because that's what the mission demanded. Through the chaos and confusion, Camille Hart didn't seek out applause. She had no desire for medals or applause or formal words dressed up in ceremony. Her actions had already said what needed to be said, louder and clearer than any speech ever could. Colonel Grant turned toward her then. His expression wasn't one of surprise. He had suspected, perhaps even known, but there was something deeper in his eyes, relief and gratitude. You saved us, he said in a voice edged with emotion. Camille shook her head. No, I didn't save anyone. I just made sure it didn't get worse. Her voice carried calm certainty. This was a probe, a test, and whoever's behind it, they'll be back. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Her words hung in the air like a shadow stretching across the room, heavy with implication. Everyone there understood what she meant. This wasn't just some random malfunction or innocent glitch in the system. It had been sabotage. Deliberate, calculated, and dangerously precise. Later that same evening, Colonel Grant called for an emergency briefing. The room quickly filled with senior officers, each one visibly tense, faces drawn, minds racing. Grant stood at the front, Camille standing quietly at his side. Though she said nothing, she stood firm and unshaken. Grant's voice was firm and plain. 3 days ago, we came dangerously close to losing aircraft, maybe even lives. He paused, then continued. We believed it was a technical failure. It wasn't. What we experienced was an attack, an intentional one designed to exploit vulnerabilities in our drone systems. Vulnerabilities we didn't even know existed. He then gestured toward Camille. This is Camille Hart, he said, voice steady, former signal specialist with the Falcon Unit, a unit most of you have never heard of because it was quietly shut down, erased from records, and buried deep in the classified archives. Officially, it never existed. Murmurs broke out across the room, curious, skeptical, tense. But Grant didn't flinch. Instead, he reached across the table and picked up a battered folder. The edges were worn, the words classified, historical stamped across the top. I don't need a current database to prove any of this, he said firmly. I was there. I served with Falcon, and I owe my life to that unit and to Camille Hart. It's not often that truth slices clean through the thick layers of bureaucracy. But in that room it did. Recognition didn't come in the form of medals or promotions, but in the truth of what she had done, when it mattered. Camille never asked for this moment, but she had earned it. And then, just when they thought she'd finally accepted her place back in their world, Camille surprised them again. Colonel Grant turned to her. I'm offering you full reinstatement, he said. Permanent clearance, access to every resource you need. But Camille, as always, chose the path few would take. I don't want reinstatement, she replied quietly. I'm not looking for my name to be back in the system. I want to finish what I started. And for that, I need access, not rank. Silence fell once more. Not because they didn't understand, but because they did. And they respected her for it. Camille Hart had saved Northwind Airfield, not through force or by barking commands down a chain of command. She saved it with precision, insight, and the kind of quiet courage that rarely gets recognized. The kind most people overlook because it doesn't shout. When the threat passed and the base's drones were safely back in their hangars, there was no parade, no ceremony, no speeches, no. And Camille wouldn't have stood for one anyway. She had no interest in decorations, rank, or status. Still, the offers were made. Grant had extended them all, a permanent role, official reinstatement, full clearance. But Camille had shaken her head. I didn't come back for a uniform, she said. I'm not here to take back a place in the system. I came to stop what's coming and to make sure no one else gets erased the way my unit did. So she stayed on the margins, a ghost in every official sense. She didn't live on base. Her name wasn't in any personnel list, no contact directory, no official roster. But once a week, always the same day, same hour, she returned to Northwind. She wore civilian clothes, the same worn olive jacket, a notebook tucked beneath her arm. She walked the drone hangars slowly, checking systems, scanning through logs, and uncovering vulnerabilities others didn't even know existed. Quiet, efficient, invisible almost. To the younger officers, many of them Texans fresh out of training, she became something like a legend. Whispers followed her path. She's the one who saved the fleet. She wrote the code we still use. She doesn't take orders, but she always knows what needs to be done. They called her Miss Hart now, and always with respect. Then one day near the checkpoint, that checkpoint, the same place where her bag had once been emptied out, where her past had been laid bare for inspection, a small plaque appeared. There was no unveiling, no fanfare, no formal acknowledgement, just a steel plate mounted on the concrete, for the one who protected without orders. Falcon lives on. Camille saw it once. Just once. She stopped, read the inscription, traced the letters with her fingers. But she didn't linger. She nodded to herself, then turned and walked away. And maybe in the end, that was the greatest kind of legacy. Not medals, not speeches, not headlines or official commendations, but the quiet work, the kind that goes unseen yet protects everyone. Systems that run smoothly because someone behind the scenes cared enough to make them right. Acts of service that ask for no reward. Camille Hart reminded them all of a simple truth. Real service doesn't always wear a uniform. True courage doesn't always come with a spotlight. Sometimes it's the one who slips through the gate without a sound, The one who fixes what no one else notices is broken. The one who never stopped showing up. Because it was necessary, not because it needed to be noticed. That's how Camille Hart operated. By choice, by conviction. Across the vast machinery of the military, from remote airfields to high-security installations, the protocols she carefully designed and constantly refined became the quiet backbone of drone defense strategies all across the country. Thousands of miles from Northwind, countless bases unknowingly leaned on the work of a woman they'd never met. Work that stood silent guard, invisible, yet indispensable. At Northwind itself, something began to shift, almost imperceptibly at first. A quiet reverence took root. The newly assigned, fresh from their training programs, were no longer just briefed on the chain of command or technical specs. They were given a simple, sincere piece of advice. If you ever come up against something that just doesn't make sense, go find Miss Hart. Be respectful, and if you're lucky, she might help you see the part you've been missing. And that's exactly what Camille Hart chose to be, a ghost in the system. She didn't want her name etched into metal or sewn onto dress blues. She didn't ask for awards, had no interest in handshakes on parade grounds or speeches from generals. Her mission wasn't for the cameras. She wanted to protect what mattered quietly, diligently, and without fail. Because in her mind, that's what service really meant. It wasn't about spotlight or applause. It was about stepping up when no one else could. About doing the work not because it might lead to a promotion, but because it needed to be done. And she had the skill, the vision, and the heart to do it. And in this world we live in now, a world obsessed with being seen, with being liked, with going viral, maybe there's a message we desperately need to hear. Camille's story, in all its quiet courage, reminds us that the most powerful acts of service often go unnoticed. They're found not in the headlines, but in the spaces between. In the neighbor who knocks on a veteran's door just to check in, not because someone told them to. In the retired mechanic who, without fanfare, repairs the aging memorial at the edge of town every time a storm rolls through. In the grandmother who spends every Thursday morning quietly stocking food pantry shelves, never asking for thanks, only hoping no one goes hungry. These are the Camilles all around us. Maybe you know one. Maybe you are one. If you do, I hope you'll take a moment to share their story in the comments. Let's lift up the ones who never asked to be lifted. Let's remember the ones who protect not with weapons, but with patience, persistence, and purpose. Because in this country, and I think many of you watching will understand this, it's never just been the soldiers in uniform who've kept the fabric of our nation strong. It's also been the quiet sentinels, the ones who stand watch in ways that are often unseen, unnoticed, but utterly essential. And here's something worth pondering. Camille didn't want to be on any list, in any official record. But what if all the people like her simply vanished? What if we stopped listening to the wisdom of those who choose silence over showmanship? Would we even recognize our quiet heroes anymore? I hope Camille's story stays with you, that it gives you something to reflect on, not just about service, but about humility, about how real strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it watches, sometimes it simply gets the job done. Thank you for giving your time to this story. If it moved you, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who still believes in quiet strength. And before you go, take a moment in the comments. Tell us about someone in your life who reminds you of Camille. Because those stories matter too, and it's up to us to make sure they're never forgotten.